Hello, my name is Philip Stiles. I'm a professor at Judge Business School at the University of Cambridge. And my role there is to do three things. One is to research, two is to teach, and three is to advise. In my research, I look at things in organizational behavior, like change and culture and technology and people. And in my recent advisory work, looking a lot with organizations around implementation of technology, the future of work, and just how organizations might be evolving. I've been a part of IEDC for many years too. It's an extraordinary place, a very inspirational place. It's called a school with a view, and of course both meanings are true. First of all, it's a beautiful area, lovely location, perfect for relaxation, inspiration, reflection. But the other meaning is also very true, that it's a place where thought leaders gather, share ideas, give inspiration. You meet many great people there. The academics are outstanding. The staff are extraordinarily brilliant, perfect professionals, I think. Also, the students are wonderful. I think it's been a real joy to be a part of the school. I think, in a way, what I like the most, I guess, if I could pick out one thing, is the focus on art. I think that's a radical thing. You hardly see that in other business schools. And again, just that the connection between leadership and art has been really inspirational, I think, for many people. And to go to that environment and see the art on the walls, to hear it being talked about in lectures and so on, is truly, truly great, I think. I think of course, I can't talk about IEDC without mentioning Danica. Danica is, of course, an inspirational individual, an entrepreneur, an academic, a business person. Her energy and her creative spirit in the school is immense, and I think she's created a wonderful institution, and to be here at the 40-year anniversary is completely amazing. So huge credit to her and all she's created. For now, I'd like to maybe just to share a few thoughts about my field, which is organizational behavior. So organizational behavior is, again, a wide field, and I thought I'd just try and share maybe three thoughts in terms of how the future might be running and how we might look towards what might be happening to organize ourselves a little bit. And the first thing I'd like, I guess, to talk about is skills, which is a huge topic now, especially in the era of AI. And I guess with skills, we see a lot of information, a lot of research about what kind of skills are going to be necessary for the future workplace. So, for example, if you look at the latest OECD report, the research which came out early this year, you see the kind of list of skills they put out for what's needed in 2030 and 2035. And of course, no surprise, there will be AI skills, digital skills, data analytics skills, processing skills. No real surprise with that. Also, interestingly, though, I think in the top 10 list, there's still a very strong representation of organizational development skills required, so change management skills required, also general manager skills required. So it's still the imperative that we have people who can organize well and who can really just make sense of everything for people. That's kind of very important, I think. The other thing with skills, I think, is in a way, some people are very pessimistic about skills. Some people think a lot of jobs will be lost because of new technology. And I think that's, of course, that you see that. I mean, we see a lot of companies, particularly, say, in the UK, where there's a lot of job loss in organizations. So you see that maybe accelerating. On the other hand, you see a lot of optimists about skills. In other words, there will be the same amount of jobs. Some jobs will be destroyed, some jobs will be created. Above all, there'll be a kind of net neutral effect. So in other words, jobs don't seem to be, there will be this similar amount of jobs, but with different skills. And I guess what that means is, we'll have to continue to relearn and to try and get more, adept. One view here is, again, from some research about the half-life of skills. The half-life of skills at the moment seems to be about 3 years. And after that, the skill begins to degrade or becomes obsolete and so on. So this means a kind of constant refreshing of the skill base. And for that to happen, Organizations will have to get much smarter about that. In other words, we can't rely too much on, people developing themselves or huge long programs over 3-4 years. There has to be bite-sized pieces of learning frequently in the moment that employees can access quickly, learn quickly, move on. That has to be a kind of new model here. I think also when we think about the kind of optimists in terms of skills, we do see with organizations a sense that, in a way, skills are being replaced quickly. What that means, say, for the permanent workforce is a tricky proposition. So, for example, if skills are changing quickly, which means that employees may be coming in and out of the organization quickly, what does this mean for issues like retention or culture? We'll come to culture in one second, but what does it mean for issues like retention? And what it seems to mean is that we think that employees will be going in and out of organizations much more rapidly. So, for example, if you look at Generation X, which is a kind of baby boomer generation, the idea of loyalty in an organization for that group was about 15 years, 10 to 15 years. And now with the Generation Z, Generation Z, that thought is now maybe down to about 4 years. If you look at the Deloitte research on this, which comes out each year, the idea of loyalty is going down. And what this might mean for an organization is tricky, because either it might mean that actually we just accept this, that actually people won't stay at organizations for very long. And so all our processes about onboarding, training, development, pay, culture, all that stuff, we'll just have to downplay that. That's one view. Second view is, let's ramp that stuff up. In other words, let's get better at onboarding. Let's get better at purpose. Let's get better at culture. Let's try and keep people. Let's double down, try and keep people more. And you see in the market, you see those two models operating very differently with different organizations. So with your organization, you have to ask yourself, are we preparing for a future where people will move in and out quickly and we're okay with that? Or do we feel that actually we absolutely need a much more permanent workforce, in which case, what are our values? What is our identity? Why should people come to us and stay? And we know why people stay at organizations is because they're interested, they like the culture, and because they feel excited by the purpose. So that's one thing about skills. The second thing really is about culture. Now with culture is again a tricky proposition. I think with culture, there's a couple of things, I think. One is, I guess, when you look at, say, the introduction of AI, which is obviously the big topic right now, I think with AI, there's a feeling that executives really want AI to be in the organization, because there's a feeling that AI will reduce costs, make things more efficient, maybe automate some processes, and so on. And we know that story. That's one thing. However, when you look at the implementation of AI or the acceptance of AI in organizations, it's a very strange story. For example, Slack, the big technology company, did a survey this year, a few weeks ago. And they looked at the way that people were responding to AI in the workplace. So they took a number of organizations which are kind of accepting or implementing AI, and they looked at the employee attitudes towards AI, and they found that most employees, something like 80%, a huge number, were either not happy with the AI, or didn't trust it, or didn't feel it was the right AI to be introducing, or felt that it didn't really affect them. And so you've got this kind of gap between the kind of idea of AI in the executive's mind and the idea of AI in the employees' minds. And if we're going to close this gap, the big feature, according to Slack and according to most people, the big feature is, can we increase trust in AI? And this is the big issue that we face. So how can we increase trust in AI? For example, how do we know that the AI we're introducing is going to really help us? Not just efficiency, but effectiveness. Will it help me in my job? Will I have to learn great new things? Will it mean my job is going to be decreased or devalued? How can we build trust in this? Yes. So in terms of culture, this is one of the big issues that we're facing. How do we just build trust in AI if we're going to make it work for us? Yes. And the third thing I'd just like to say, just for the future, is about structure. So right now, if we're going to have, an agile, flexible workplace, which everyone talks about, and I'm sure many of you have agile, flexible workplaces. We know that if we want to really be super efficient and super effective, we need great networks, we need fluid boundaries. In other words, we want to move from a kind of triangle kind of organization with a deep hierarchy to a more circular organization where people are much more fluid and have cross-functional teams. We need all that. We know that. And most firms, are somewhere in between. We can't ditch the hierarchy. We know that too. But some firms, many firms, are trying to move across, which is a good thing, obviously a good thing, because we know with more agility, more flexibility, we get faster information processing, better knowledge flow, and people are more creative, right? So we know all that. However, for the future, this is only going to intensify. And what that means is, we think, traditional organizations, the boundaries between the traditional organizations is going to start becoming eroded. Because as technology, as innovation, as organizations become much more fluid, the distance or the barriers between them will reduce. This comes back to the idea of an ecosystem. What we see happening right now, but is going to only increase, is the idea that organizations as standalone units is going to decrease rapidly. And what we're going to have is great clusters of organizations which have very, very fluid boundaries. And what that means for identity and meaning and loyalty, again, is a huge open questions. We already see this in banking. So in banking, we have this idea of what we call open banking, where third parties, other than the banks, are allowed to gather data from the banks with the customer's permission and aggregate it. And so customers can see across their mortgage products, their savings products, and so on. Now, what that means is that banks then become disintermediated, and the third party holds all the data. And so for the customer, you can see at a glance all your products at a glance. That's very powerful. That's been around for a few years. That's only going to increase. And you can see similar issues in many other industries, many other sectors, where this aggregation of data will no longer mean that I have to be loyal to my bank or this bank, because I can access all my financial data from many organizations in one place. So that's going to be interesting in terms of leadership, culture, loyalty, motivation, and so on. So they're just three things: one about skills, two about culture, three about structure. And these things are kind of here already, but they're only going to intensify. So I just want to leave it there. And again, I just want to reiterate my huge admiration for what's happened at IEDC over all these years. All the wonderful faculty, all the wonderful staff, the brilliant students. It's been a huge honor and pleasure to be part of it. And thank you so much for listening.